Single woman walked into the street and started dancing. She didn't stop. Not after an hour, not after a day, not after a week. She just kept dancing, and then her neighbors joined her, then strangers, then hundreds of people dancing in the streets, day and night, unable to stop, unable to rest, unable to explain why their own bodies would not obey them. And some of them danced until they died. Stay till the end, because this story sounds like a fairy tale, like something from a horror movie, like something a person invents around a campfire. Every single word of it is historically documented. This is the dancing plague of 1518, and it is one of the strangest things that has ever happened to human beings. Strasbourg 1518, a city already BRAKNG before we meet the woman who started it. You need to understand the city she lived in. Strasbourg, July 1518, modern France, medieval Europe. And here is what nobody talks about when they tell this story. Strasbourg in 1518 was a city under enormous pressure. Famine had been spreading across the region for years. Crops had failed. Food was scarce. People were hungry, genuinely, desperately hungry, in a way that modern people can barely imagine. Disease was moving through the population. Smallpox, syphilis, the plague. Always the plague. Always the plague lurking at the edges of every medieval city, ready to return at any moment. The people of Strasbourg were exhausted, frightened, desperate. They had been praying for relief, praying for the suffering to end, living with a level of stress and fear and helplessness that ground people down day after day with no end in sight. And here is what modern science now understands about human beings under that kind of pressure. The mind can break in ways that look like madness, but that understanding was 500 years away. In 1518, nobody understood what was coming. Frau Troffea, the woman who started ITEL, her name was Frau Troffea. We do not know much about her. History did not care enough about ordinary women in 1518 to record their full stories. What we know is this. In mid-July 1518, she walked out of her house in Strasbourg and began to dance, alone, in the street, in the summer heat. No music, number, celebration, no festival. Just a woman dancing. Her husband reportedly tried to stop her, tried to bring her inside, tried to make her rest. She could not stop. Day 1, she danced. Day 2, she was still dancing. Day 3, her feet were bleeding through her shoes. Her legs were shaking with exhaustion. Her face showed not joy, but something much closer to terror, but she could not stop. By day 4, something even more terrifying began. She was no longer alone. 1 became 10, 10 became hundreds. A neighbor joined her, then another, then a stranger passing through the street, stopped and started dancing alongside them. And here is what makes this story so deeply unsettling. These were not people who wanted to dance. Witnesses described their faces not happy, not celebrating, desperate, exhausted, terrified, eyes wide, but eyes moving against their own will, or at least against their own desire. They groaned, they cried out. Some reportedly begged people watching to help them stop, Nobody could help them. Within a week, dozens were dancing in the streets of Strasbourg. Within a month approximately, 400 people were dancing. 400 people, day and night, without stopping, without sleeping, without eating properly, moving through the streets of Strasbourg in a mass of exhausted, terrified, uncontrollable motion. The city was watching something it had never seen before, and here is what nobody expected. The city's response made everything worse. The city's insane, RESPONST. Authorities of Strasbourg panicked, and when frightened people in positions of power make quick decisions, they often make spectacularly wrong ones. Their doctors examined the dancers, and these medieval physicians came to a conclusion that it seems almost unbelievable today. The dancing, they said, was caused by hot blood. The cure, more dancing. Let it run its course, they said. Keep the dancers moving. Give them space. Give them music. The city council, following this medical advice, cleared to guild halls, hired professional musicians, brought in fiddlers and drummers, and turned the dancing plague of 1518 into an organized public dance event. They were trying to cure a mass outbreak of uncontrollable dancing by providing better conditions for the dancing to continue. But here is what nobody talks about. This decision, as insane as it sounds, actually had a kind of twisted logic to it. The authorities believed they were dealing with a physical illness, something in the blood that needed to be released. They thought structure and organization might help. What they actually did was validate the behavior, signal to the unconscious minds of an already terrified population that this was acceptable, normal, even officially sanctioned, and so more people joined. 15 people a day were Dewey Engine. This is where the story stops being strange and starts being genuinely tragic. At the peak of the dancing plague, approximately 15 people per day were collapsing, some from exhaustion so severe their hearts simply gave out, some from strokes, blood vessels in the brain bursting under the physical strain of days of continuous movement, some from dehydration, some from falls, some from injuries sustained during days of uncontrolled motion on cobblestone streets. Think about that number, 15 people every day in a city that was already suffering from famine and disease. People who had families, children who watched their parents dance until they collapsed, husbands who watched wives they could not help, neighbors who stood in doorways watching people they had known their entire lives destroying themselves and unable to do anything. This was not a festival. This was not joy. This was a community in the grip of something none of them understood. And all of them feared what was really happening. And this is the part that makes the dancing plague of 1518 so endlessly fascinating to historians, psychologists, and scientists, even today. What was actually happening? The simplest explanation, and the one that most modern researchers accept, is mass psychogenic illness, what used to be called mass hysteria. But here is what nobody talks about when they use that term. Mass hysteria does not mean people were faking it. It does not mean they were making a choice. The human mind, under extreme and prolonged stress, can generate real physical symptoms, real involuntary movements, real loss of control over the body, not imaginary, not performed, real. The people of Strasbourg in 1518 were living under conditions of extraordinary psychological pressure, famine, disease, fear of death, helplessness, a profound sense that God had abandoned them. The human nervous system has limits, and when those limits are crossed, in a community where people share beliefs, fears, and a common framework for understanding suffering, the breakdown can spread, person to person, like a contagion, not of bacteria or virus, but of fear. The theories curse, poison or something. D-A-R-K-R now. Here is what makes this story even more interesting, because not everyone agrees. Some researchers have pointed to ergotism, a condition caused by a fungus called ergot that grows on rye grain. Eating ergot-contaminated bread can cause convulsions and involuntary muscle movements. But here is the problem with that theory. Ergotism does not produce coordinated dancing movements. It produces convulsions, spasms, uncontrolled jerking, not rhythmic dance. Others have suggested that dancers were part of a religious cult performing ritual movement as a form of worship or penance. But the historical records are clear. These people were not celebrating. They were suffering. And here is the detail that closes the argument for most historians. The dancing. Plague of 1518 was not unique. Similar outbreaks had occurred in Europe, in 1374, in 1375, in 1376, always in communities, under extreme stress, always spreading person to person, always subsiding when the underlying community stress was addressed. Pattern after pattern after pattern, mass psychogenic illness, triggered by unbearable communal suffering. The curse was not supernatural. It was human, and in some ways that makes it more frightening. How I to finally Ian Diddy by late August 1518. The authorities finally changed their approach. They stopped the music. They removed the dancers from public spaces where their movements could be seen and unconsciously imitated by others. They took the most severely affected to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and those suffering from nervous conditions. There, the dancers were given red shoes, a symbolic act meant to transfer the curse into the shoes. Their feet were touched with holy relics. They were prayed over. They were given rest, food, and calm. And gradually, the dancing stopped. By September 1518, approximately 2 months after Frau Troffea first stepped into that street, the de Furreau, the dancing plague of 1518 was over. The musicians packed up. The guild halls emptied. The streets of Strasbourg went quiet, and the city tried to forget what had happened. Why this still haunts us. Podawai hears why the dancing plague of 1518 matters in 2024, because it is not as distant as it seems. Mass psychogenic illness still happens today. Documented cases in schools, factories, and communities around the world where groups of people develop real physical symptoms simultaneously, triggered by shared stress and fear, spreading through social observation and belief. The conditions that created the dancing plague: unbearable stress, helplessness, fear. Community suffering with no outlet are not medieval conditions. They are human conditions. They exist wherever people are pushed beyond what they can bear. The people of Strasbourg in 1518 were not weak. They were not stupid. They were human beings, facing impossible circumstances, whose minds and bodies reached a breaking point, and, in the absence of understanding, their suffering became spectacle. Frau Troffea walked into a street in Strasbourg in July 1518 and started dancing. She did not choose to dance. She did not want to dance. She was a human being whose mind, under unbearable pressure, lost its grip on her body, and 400 of her neighbors followed, heard not because they were cursed, not because of poison in their bread, but because they were all carrying the same weight, and some weights are too heavy to carry alone. The dancing plague of 1518 is not just a strange story from medieval Europe. It is a window into what human beings are capable of when the world they live in becomes too much to bear. Remember, Frau Troffea, not as a curiosity, not as a punchline, but as a reminder that suffering, ignored, always finds a way to make itself seen.